Up and vanished. 10 mysterious disappearances. Number 10. Harold Holt was the 17th Prime Minister of Australia, and he began his term in January 1966. He was a career politician, having entered Parliament at the age of 27. He ascended the ranks and became a government minister at the age of 30. Initially, when he entered office, Holt refused a security detail as he considered it unnecessary and potentially alienating to the general public. However, after 2 incidents occurred in mid-1966, Holt grudgingly accepted a single bodyguard for his official duties. Holt refused any protection while on holiday because he regarded it as a violation of his privacy. Later, it was suggested that he excluded additional protection so he could hide his extramarital affairs. By all accounts, Holt was an avid outdoorsman, and he enjoyed swimming, skin diving, and snorkeling. Although he suffered from an old shoulder injury and still felt effects from a severe concussion in his youth, Holt had been in reasonably good health throughout his life. On the morning of December 17th, Holt had breakfast with his wife and then made plans for the rest of the day to meet friends and spend the afternoon spearfishing and having a barbecue. Along the drive to Portsea, Holt suggested that the group stop at the beach for a swim. It was about 12:15 p.m. and he wanted to cool down and work up an appetite before lunch. Holt knew the area well and had swum there many times before, but his friends felt the undercurrent was too strong that day. Holt disregarded their concerns and swam into deeper water and was dragged out to sea. His friends called out to him, but surprisingly he did not raise his arms or cry for help. He soon slipped under the waves and out of sight. After serving in office for less than 2 years, Harold Holt had vanished. There are many conspiracies surrounding his disappearance, as not all believe he was a victim of an accidental drowning. Theories range from government involvement, suicide, and faking his own death. After an extensive search operation, no trace of Harold Holt was found. No formal investigation into his whereabouts was ever brought forth, and his disappearance remains a mystery. Number 9. Stephen Cooper. Father of one, Stephen Cooper, went missing from his home in Huddersfield, West Yorkshire, after celebrating his 47th birthday on the 21st of January 2008. Stephen drove from Yorkshire toward Scotland using the A1 road for at least some of the journey. He reached Greenock and went to a supermarket around 10 a.m. that same day. Extensive searches were made over a 50-square-mile area using helicopters, search dogs, and mountain rescue teams. He did not take his driving license, passport, mobile phone, bank cards, change of clothes, nor did he leave a note behind. Stephen wasn't thought to be depressed, although he did have a genetic disorder called Marfan syndrome, which meant he had difficulty walking. A week later, on Sunday, January 27th, Stephen's blue Ford Focus was found off the A86 in the village of Moy, Inverness. His family were puzzled to learn what items were found in the car. There was 2 of every item: 2 bottles of pop, 2 muffin wrappers, 2 pre-packed sandwich wrappers. But who paid for these items, as it has been established that Stephen had no money on him? To date, no further traces of Stephen Cooper have been found. Number 8. Paula Jean Weldon. On Sunday, December 1st, 1946, 18-year-old Paula finished working 2 shifts in the dining hall at the school she attended, Bennington College in Vermont. She returned to her dorm room, changed her clothes, and told her roommate she was going for a long hike. Her roommate remembered Paula saying she was feeling a bit down a few days before, and that she had not gone home over Thanksgiving period for reasons unknown. Paula was the eldest of 4 daughters, and by all accounts a person that immersed herself in many activities. She enjoyed swimming, biking, skating, hiking, camping, square dancing, and playing the guitar. She also had a special interest in botany. It was 50 degrees that Sunday when Paula left the college in light clothing, but by the evening it grew much colder and windier with snow. Around 2:30 p.m., several students witnessed Paula walking down Route 67A, and by 4 p.m. she was spotted heading towards a bridge leading to the Bickford Hollow Trail. With darkness descending around 4:30, she was on the trail with inadequate clothing and no supplies. The following morning, it was 9 degrees in Bennington with a high wind. After Paula failed to show up for her classes on Monday, December 2nd, the director of admissions at the college informed Paula's family. A local taxi driver stated he had taken a student to the bus station on Sunday afternoon, but couldn't positively identify her as Paula. After carrying out searches and investigating several possible sightings, the authorities found nothing. Was she abducted either on the trail or as she headed back to her dorm? Or perhaps foul play was involved? In the many years since her mysterious disappearance, Paula's body nor possessions have been found. The case remains open to this day. Number 7. Brian Schaefer. On April 1st, 2006, medical student Brian Schaefer decided to have a meal with his father. It was only April, but it had been a tough year so far. Along with studies, Brian had been grieving the loss of his mother just a month before. During the meal, they discussed how things were going and that Brian would soon be taking a vacation during spring break with his girlfriend the following day, at which it is believed Brian planned to propose. After spending time with his father, later that evening, Brian decided to catch up with his ex-roommate Clint Florence at South Campus Gateway's Ugly Tuna Saloona bar in Columbus, Ohio. The two men arrived around 9 p.m. Around an hour later, Brian briefly had a phone conversation with his girlfriend, Alexis Wagner, who was visiting with her parents in Toledo. At the end of the call, Brian told Alexis he loved her, and it was the last time she heard his voice. Schaefer and Florence went bar hopping, working their way down to the Arena District. According to Florence, they would take a shot of liquor at each stop. After midnight, Schaefer and Florence met Meredith Reed, a friend of Florence, along the way. Reed gave them a ride back up to the Ugly Tuna Saloona where they began the night originally, and joined them there for one last round. At some point, Brian got separated from Clint and Meredith. They attempted to locate Brian, but couldn't, so they ended up leaving with the other patrons around 2 a.m. They waited outside for Brian, and when they didn't see him in the crowd, they assumed he had gone back to his apartment without letting them know. His father and his girlfriend's father tried to call him later that weekend, but they did not get an answer. Police began their search for Brian at the Ugly Tuna Saloona as the bar had recently installed security cameras. They reviewed the footage, which showed Brian, Clint, and Meredith going up an escalator to the bar's main entrance at 1:15 a.m. Then Brian was seen outside of the bar around 1:55 a.m., talking briefly with two young women. Then he is seen moving off camera in the direction of the bar, apparently to re-enter, and this would be the last time he was seen alive, as the cameras did not record him exiting the bar ever again. Brian Schaefer had vanished. On Monday morning, he missed the flight to Miami he had planned with his girlfriend Alexis many months before. It was then that he was reported as missing to the Columbus police. During the investigation into his disappearance, police considered the possibility he could have changed his clothes in the bar, kept his head down, hid his face from the camera, and exited in plain sight. But this theory seemed unlikely, as he would have had to carry a spare set of clothes with him. The building's only other exit, a service door not generally used by the public at the time of his disappearance, led onto a construction site. It is possible, in an intoxicated state, he could have met a fatal accidental fall. However, Columbus, Ohio has the most security cameras of any city in the state, and footage from other bars did not show him leaving the Ugly Tuna Saloona, nor any trace of him, but the police could not rule out foul play either. No useful information was uncovered at Schaefer's apartment, which was 6 blocks from the bar. His car was still parked outside, and nothing appeared out of order. Police began to consider other possibilities besides an accident or foul play. Brian's mother had recently died a month before, and it was speculated he had gone away to grieve in solitude, but there appeared to be no solid case for him to voluntarily disappear. Those who had seen Schaefer that evening, including his father, were asked to take lie detector tests. Brian's father and Meredith had passed theirs, as did others. However, Clint declined to take one. According to Brian's brother Derek, Clint spoke negatively of Brian after he went missing, which raised suspicions that Clint was somehow involved in Brian's case. However, there has never been evidence linking Clint to Brian's disappearance. Theories surrounding the case of Brian Schaefer include: Brian slipped out of the bar unnoticed and met with foul play. Brian went out of the emergency exit, fell in a hole in the construction site, and was covered over with cement. Some people believe he may have crossed paths with the smiley-faced serial killers, or that he's still inside the bar, having accidentally died and his death being covered up by staff. Finally, people believe that Brian left his family and his friends behind to start a new life. Tragically, in 2008, Brian's father passed away not knowing the fate of his son. Brian Schaefer's case is still unsolved. Number 6, Number 5, Number 4, Number 3, Number 2. The 5 Sauter Children. On Christmas Eve, December 24, 1945, in Fayetteville, West Virginia, George Sauter, his wife Jenny, and 9 of their 10 children awoke to a fire rampaging through their home. During the fire, George, Jenny, and 4 of their 9 children were able to escape. The blaze consumed the home, and the 5 remaining children could not be reached. After the fire was extinguished, the bodies of the 5 children were not found. The Sauter couple and surviving children would continue to believe for the rest of their lives that the 5 missing children somehow survived and their whereabouts remain unknown. On December 28th, 4 days later, and after no investigation having taken place, Jenny couldn't bear to look at the remains of their home and the painful reminder of their missing children. So after initially accepting the idea that 5 of their children had perished in the fire, George had their home bulldozed to the ground, deciding to convert the site into a memorial garden for their lost children. A short while later, George would regret this choice after further information regarding their children emerged. The local coroner convened an inquest the next day after the area had already been covered over with 5 feet of dirt to prepare for the garden. George found the timing suspicious and questioned authorities for their slow response, lack of investigation, and possible cover-up. The inquest concluded that the fire was an accident caused by faulty wiring. It had come to light that George was not particularly liked by many townspeople. George had strong political opinions he expressed which some people did not like, especially since he was from the Italian immigrant community, but he was outspoken against Mussolini and the fascist government of his native Italy. The town conducted a trial, and interestingly enough, among the jurors was the man who had threatened George only a year earlier that his house would burn down and his children destroyed in retribution for his anti-Mussolini remarks. Death certificates for the 5 children were issued on December 30th, 1945. The local newspaper contradicted itself, stating that all the bodies had been found, but then later in the same story reporting that only one part of one body was recovered. George and Jenny were too grief-stricken to attend the funeral on January 2, 1946, although their surviving children did. In the 1950s, as the family came to lose faith in authorities and doubt that the children had perished, they decided to put up a billboard with pictures of the 5 children, offering a reward for information that would bring closure to the case. The billboard remained until 1989. The Sauters pointed to a number of unusual circumstances that occurred before and during the event that are questionable at best. On the morning of the fire, the telephone rang at 12:30 a.m. Jenny awoke and went downstairs to answer it. The caller was a woman whose voice she did not recognize, asking for a name she was not familiar with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses in the background. Jenny told the caller she had reached the wrong number, later recalling the woman's weird laugh. Jenny hung up and returned to bed. Then, around 1 a.m., Jenny awoke to a noise outside the house, like something hit the roof, but thought it was perhaps just wind, and returned to sleep. She was again alerted by another sound of an object hitting the house roof with a loud bang and a rolling noise. After hearing nothing further, she went back to sleep, and about 30 minutes later she woke up again, smelling smoke. When she got up, she found that the room George used as his office was on fire. Jenny woke George, and in turn he woke their older sons. Both parents and 4 of their children, Marion, Sylvia, John, and George Jr., escaped the house. They frantically yelled to the children upstairs, but they heard no response. They could not go up to the attic, as the stairway itself was already aflame. Efforts to find aid and rescue the children were unexpectedly complicated. The home phone did not work, so Marion ran to a neighbor's to call for the fire department, but her phone wouldn't connect to the operator. A driver on the nearby road had seen the flames and tried to call from a nearby tavern, but he too was unsuccessful. George Sauter tried to use both of his trucks to drive closer to the house so that he could use them as a ladder to crawl up to the attic. Both vehicles were previously in good working order, but that night, in that moment, neither would start. Instead, George, while barefoot, climbed the wall and broke open an attic window, cutting his arm in the process. He and his sons intended to use a ladder to the attic to rescue the other children, but that too was not in its usual spot, where it was rested against the house and could not be found anywhere nearby. After the incident, the ladder had been located at the bottom of the embankment 75 feet away from the house. Eventually, the fire department were alerted, but it was too late. Death certificates for the 5 children were issued on December 30th. The local newspaper contradicted itself, stating that all bodies had been found, but then later in the same story reporting that only part of one body was recovered. George and Jenny were too grief-stricken to attend the funeral on January 2nd, 1946. Their surviving children did. Not long afterward, they began to rebuild their lives. The Sauters started to question all of the official findings about the fire. They wondered why, if it had been caused by an electrical problem, that the family's Christmas lights had remained on throughout the fire's early stages when the power should have gone out. Later, a telephone repairman told the Sauters that the house's phone line had not burned through the fire, as they initially thought, but instead it was cut by someone who had been willing and able to climb 14 feet up the pole, reach over 2 feet, and then cut the cable. The police claimed neighbors had seen a man stealing a block and tackle from the property around the time of the fire and was identified and arrested. He admitted to the theft and claimed he had been the one who had cut the phone line, thinking it was a power line, but denied having anything to do with the fire. What would be the reason for the man to cut any wires? Also, no record identifying the suspect exists. Jenny said in 1968 that if a man had cut the power line, she and her husband, along with their other 4 children, would never have been able to see in order to make it out of the house alive. Years later, after the incident, witnesses claimed to have seen the children themselves. One woman who had been watching the fire from the road said she had seen some of them peering out of a passing car while the house was burning. Another woman at a rest stop between Fayetteville and Charleston said she had served them breakfast the next morning and noted the presence of a car with Florida license plates in the rest stop's parking lot as well. Over the years, the Sauters did not give up hope. They had flyers printed up with the pictures of the children, offering a $5,000 reward, later doubles to $10,000, for any information that could settle the case for even one of the missing children. In 1949, the site of the house fire was excavated. Human vertebrae bones were found, but an expert said they could only come from a human aged 16 to 23, and that the bones had never been exposed to fire. The oldest of the missing children was 14 at the time. The expert also noted that it is very strange that only these types of bones were found, because if the children had passed in the inferno, their bones would have remained intact against the fire and should still be on site. Later, George said to the Charleston Gazette-Mail that the lack of information has been like hitting a rock wall. We can't go any further. Time is running out for us, and we only want to know if they did die in the fire. We want to be convinced. Otherwise, we want to know what happened to them. George Sauter died in 1969. After George's death, Jenny stayed in the family home, putting up fencing around it and adding additional rooms. For the rest of her life, she wore black in mourning and tended the garden at the site of the former home. After Jenny's death in 1989, the family finally took the weathered-worn billboard down. Sylvia Sauter Paxton, the youngest in the family, was in the house on the night of the fire. She recalled to the Gazette-Mail in 2013 her earliest memory. "I was the last one of the kids to leave the home." As an adult, Sylvia and her father often stayed up late at night talking about what might have happened to the children. "I experienced their grief for a long time," she said. She believed her siblings survived that night. She made every effort to publicize the case as she promised her father and her family that she would never let the story be forgotten. In 2021, Sylvia died, not knowing what had become of her siblings, and 76 years later, the fate of the Sauter children remains a mystery. Number 1. D.B. Cooper. D.B. Cooper, unlike other persons on this countdown, Cooper's disappearance seems to be at his own hand. For the past 50 years, this case has eluded authorities and has inspired countless stories, TV programs, movie adaptations, and folklore. Dan Cooper was a pseudonym name given by a passenger who would later be identified with the moniker D.B. Cooper during a Northwest Orient flight. In November 1971, a man dressed in a black suit with a polite manner boarded and hijacked a Boeing 727 plane en route from Portland to Seattle. During the flight, Cooper quietly approached air hostess Florence Schaefer and informed her that he had a bomb with him, which she requested to see, and he politely obliged and showed her a glimpse into his briefcase. He then asked her to convey the following demands to the captain, William A. Scott, to relay to ground control. He demanded payment of $200,000, 4 parachutes, which were to be 2 primary and 2 reserve, and a fuel truck to be on standby in Seattle to refuel the aircraft upon arrival. Schaefer conveyed Cooper's instructions to the pilots in the cockpit, and when she returned, Cooper was wearing dark sunglasses. Flight attendant Tina Mucklow recalled that Cooper appeared familiar with the local terrain. At one point he remarked, "Looks like Tacoma down there," as the aircraft flew above it. He wasn't nervous, Mucklow told investigators. He seemed rather nice. He was never cruel or nasty. He was thoughtful and calm all the time. He ordered a second bourbon and a soda, and he paid for his drink. And he attempted to give change to Mucklow. He offered to request meals for the flight crew during the stop in Seattle. After calmly conveying further orders for the flight crew to cooperate entirely, Cooper was able to successfully land the plane at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. He requested all passengers and most flight attendants to leave the aircraft. FBI agents assembled the ransom money from several Seattle area banks. 10,000 unmarked $20 bills, most with serial numbers beginning with the letter L. The FBI made a microfilm photograph of each of them. Cooper rejected the military-issue parachutes offered by McCord AFB personnel Instead, he demanded civilian parachutes with manually operated ripcords. Seattle police obtained them from local skydiving school. After receiving the money and parachutes, the plane took off once more. Cooper asked all of the remaining crew to join the pilot in the cockpit, where he was briefly observed trying to tie something around his waist. About 45 minutes after the second flight had begun, the plane's air stair apparatus had been activated. D.B. Cooper had jumped from the aircraft mid-flight. This was later confirmed when the plane eventually landed at Reno Airport and the mysterious passenger was nowhere to be found. FBI agents recovered 66 unidentified latent fingerprints aboard the airliner. The agents also found Cooper's black clip-on tie, his tie clip, and 2 of the 4 parachutes, one of which had been opened with 2 shrewd lines cut from the canopy. Authorities interviewed eyewitnesses in Portland, Seattle, and Reno and developed a series of composite sketches that have become infamous today. Cooper parachuted somewhere between Seattle and Reno. If he successfully landed on the ground, he was never identified or linked to committing the crime. On February 10, 1980, 8-year-old Brian Ingram was vacationing with his family on the Columbia River at a beachfront about 9 miles downstream from Vancouver, Washington. He uncovered 3 packets of the ransom cash as he raked the sandy riverbank to build a campfire. The bills were disintegrated but still bundled in rubber bands. FBI technicians confirmed that the money was indeed a portion of the ransom. 2 packets of $120 bills each and a third packet of 90, all arranged in the same order as when given to Cooper. The discovery of the money raised more questions than it answered. It was possible D.B. Cooper may not have met a safe landing, or that he let go of some weight to enable him to make a hasty getaway if he had landed in the water. He could have intentionally buried the money, or simply the money fell from his possessions during or after his landing. He was never successfully identified by anyone for the past 50 years, even though his case with the FBI remained active until 2016. The 60-volume case file compiled over the 45-year course of the investigation will continue to be preserved for historical purposes at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and on the FBI website. All of the evidence is open to the public. D.B. Cooper is now regarded as one of the most mysterious criminals in U.S. history. He was described as being calm, well-spoken, polite, and didn't harm anyone. Despite his infamous crime and planned masterful escape, D.B. Cooper was able to literally vanish into thin air.